Your Eminence, distinguished ambassadors, distinguished guests and honorees, it's an honor to be here this evening with all of you, not just as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee or as a friend to the Hellenic community, but a believer in the power of our democratic values and the courage of those who are willing to defend them. Around the world, and even here in the United States, these values are under assault. We must do everything we can to elevate those voices speaking truth to power, who, in the face of grave injustice, are standing up and saying no. As you all know, the day that Hitler's forces demanded Greece surrender to Nazi Germany, it would have been easy for the Prime Minister to say yes. Instead, he said no. He did the courageous thing. That's the courage we celebrate today with the Ohi Awards, and it's the same courage that Jamal Khashoggi displayed throughout his career as a contributing columnist to the Washington Post and a devoted chronicler of the Arab world. He could have done the easy thing. He could have stayed silent while Saudi Arabia bombed civilians in Yemen and suppressed human rights at home. Instead, Jamal Khashoggi did the courageous thing. He spoke out, he said no, he exposed the Saudi kingdom's atrocities, he called on the Crown Prince to end the violence in Yemen, he called for basic political freedoms for his fellow Saudi citizens. Simply put, he fearlessly and unapologetically championed fundamental democratic values, including human rights and freedom of the press. Yet it was Jamal Khashoggi's penchant for truth-telling that led the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to target him for assassination. His barbaric murder was a shock to our collective conscience. Freedom of the press is a fundamental democratic value, a core political freedom that keeps government accountable to its people. Yet Khashoggi's heinous murder spurred more than outrage for the Saudi government. It also spurred a reinvigorated defense of the importance of standing up for these values, of calling on our elected officials to stand up for these values and to make clear on the global stage that the United States remains a champion of the fundamental freedoms that shaped our nation. Our foreign policy is, of course, driven by our national security, but it also must continue to be rooted in the values that helped shape the post-World War II international order. So when we see governments across the world quash free expression, and in this case, in the most horrific way possible, we must assert American leadership. So as a co-equal branch of government, the United States Congress took action to show the world that we will not let this act of brutal injustice go unanswered. Then the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Corker, and I as the ranking member used the Global Magnitsky Act to mandate the administration determine those responsible and decide whether the president would sanction them. The Senate then unanimously condemned Khashoggi's murder, including the Crown Prince's involvement. Soon thereafter, the House of Representatives voted to sanction those responsible, and the entire Congress passed a bipartisan measure effectively ending U.S. military support for the Saudi intervention in Yemen. I then led the effort to pass a series of unprecedented resolutions to block the sale of thousands of weapons to the governments of the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. In July, the Foreign Relations Committee approved my bipartisan Saudi Arabia Accountability and Yemen Act to sanction those responsible for Khashoggi's death, pursue a resolution to the conflict in Yemen, and increase scrutiny on Saudi Arabia's human rights abuses, which I urge the Senate to pass. So we continue to press for a full accounting because we must continue to be the voice of those who cannot speak for themselves. We know the importance that one voice can have. We know the importance of one voice demanding accountability, one voice saying no. Our democratic values remain strong. We must not falter in our belief that America's moral weight must bear down on the injustices of this world. I have faith that the world will not forget Jamal Khashoggi, thanks in large part to organizations like this one that help keep the democratic values he championed alive, and to the commitment of the Washington Post to the truth and defense of those who tell the truth. With that, I now invite you all to learn more about Jamal Khashoggi, Ohi Courage, by watching this video.
I called for women driving. I called for unplugging support for radicalism, to fight corruption. I even lost my jobs as an editor of a newspaper twice because of that.
The job of journalists is to ask questions, to speak truth to power, to question authority. This is what Jamal Khashoggi was committed to. He was a brave and dedicated journalist, and a warm and very funny man. He believed with great courage and passion that the way to achieve a better place for his country and society was to strive for an independent and free media.
Jamal Khashoggi has stood for freedom, he wrote for freedom, he died for freedom.
He resonated in ways that nobody else did. He had transformed from an important part of the Saudi establishment to being the most influential political pundit in the Arab world.
Jamal became a voice for those who were silenced.
He was a visionary. He was an ambassador. His message of universality, freedom of expression, justice, equality, the right to ownership, all of these he stood for and he articulated consistently for decades.
He understood that a great journalist is not the one who takes a side or ideology. A great journalist is the one that stands for truth. We know that Jamal stands for democracy. We will continue the fight for democracy. Your spirit, your ideas, your thoughts, your values will continue to empower us.
His message will continue to influence and impact upon people, not only in the Middle East, but well beyond.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to accept the 2019 Ohi Courage Award, Jamal Khashoggi friend and Freedom Initiative founder, Mohammed Sultan.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Exactly 2 years ago, I was present for a call Jamal had with Saud Qahtani, the right-hand man and enforcer of the Crown Prince. It was only 2 months after Jamal Khashoggi went into self-imposed exile. He got a Twitter DM from Saud asking him to talk. Jamal was justifiably nervous. We were on our way to my sister's house to have dinner, as he usually joined us for family dinners on Sundays. He hurried into the house anxiously, sat at the dinner table, asked me to quiet the kids, and told me record this call. Jamal held his phone in his hand, put it on speaker, and asked me to record. The call lasted 1 minute and 42 seconds. I recorded it on my phone. Saud, of course, started by introducing himself, establishing his authority, and saying that I am calling on behalf of His Royal Highness, Mohammed bin Salman. And I want to tell you, I am sending you a message from him that he thanks you for your tweet about the lifting of the driving ban for women. He told him that the prince followed his work very, very closely, and he was very pleased to see that tweet. Jamal quickly responded very courteously, and he said, "Please send my regards to His Highness and tell him that it's only my duty as a patriot to compliment any positive reforms." See, Jamal could have stopped right there. He could have taken in the praise and even asked for a favor and used the rapport that he just built with this man to, lift the travel ban that Mohammed bin Salman had on his eldest son in Saudi Arabia. But Jamal continued. As his hands shook uncontrollably and his voice trembled, and he said, "And when there are transgressions, we will critique." Jamal, amidst this very, very noticeable fear, he used the rest of the call to advocate for the release of political prisoners, thinkers, writers, and preachers. He named them in a hurry. He pled for their release and testified to their patriotism and love of country. You see, bearing witness to that call was a turning point in my relationship with Jamal. Up until then, I was very skeptical. I had wrongfully judged Jamal, and because he was a man that worked for people that put people like me in prison. But that call did it for me. It calmed my fears and quieted my skepticism. For a man to selflessly use the rapport that he just built with an incredibly powerful man, that he just built with an infamously aggressive man, to advocate for others, is a sign of an honorable man. And to do that, despite his fear, just like Senator Menendez just said, despite his shaking hands and cracking voice, despite the crippling fear for his children, whom he left out of politics on purpose for the longest time, because to shield them from the world that he was living in, despite fearing for his life so much that he had to ask his 30-year-old friend to record the call in case a threat was made, to muster up that courage, to challenge policies of the most powerful man in his country is the epitome of courage. Courage is to take a stance when it is not convenient. Courage is standing on principle when the ground is shaking beneath you. Courage is saying ohi when it's easier to say ne. See, here's the thing. Jamal's story isn't very different from the millions of Arab dissidents in the region and in exile, living in a perpetual state of fear and helplessness, constantly looking over our shoulders in fear of persecution. Just like Jamal, all we want is a normal life. All we want is to be able to have a routine, a family, to be able to live freely, speak as we like, and believe as we wish. Instead of a series of perpetual compounded oppressions with absolutely no breaks, where our friends and mentors get imprisoned, tortured, and chopped up in broad daylight. And the perpetrators get to get away with stunning impunity. You see, what happened to Jamal at that consulate last year? It was only an ugly and a very messy manifestation of everything that has been happening in the Arab world since the fall of the Arab Spring. Can we now turn our collective attention as advocates, as influencers, as policymakers? Can we turn them to all of the issues that Jamal got killed shedding light on instead of just on his gruesome murder? Can we talk about the extrajudicial killings, the enforced disappearances, the mass trials, the censorship? Can we talk about the travel bans and policies that have been inflicted upon any person who wishes to practice their most basic human rights? Can we talk about the disease of authoritarianism, not just the symptoms? I really hope we can. Because one thing is for sure. Just as those authoritarian regimes won't stop oppressing us, pummeling us to the ground, and killing us off, we won't stop pushing back. We won't stop resisting in every peaceful way possible. Just as they are set in their ways to enslave and dehumanize the populations that they rule, we will not stop freeing ourselves. We might not have the resources to hire the best consultants to write our speeches and prep us for our meetings and interviews, but we have each other. And we have people like you, like every single one of you in this room and across the world, who believe in us and our people's struggle for freedom and self-determination. We are smarter, so our learning curve is higher. And we are agile because we are not bound by the limitations of power. So change is inevitable, whether these regimes like it or not. And lucky for us, time and history are on our side. We grieve deeply for those that have fallen in the process, just like Jamal. But there is an Arab line of poetry that reads, if one of us falls, another will rise and speak and act as those that have fallen. So we will honor Jamal by carrying his message forward. The heinous and despicable crime committed against him was intended to intimidate us into silence. Well, the lesson was not learned, because his death only cemented our belief in the values that Jamal held dear. He taught us that it was okay to be afraid, and that even when our hands are shaking and our voices are cracking, we can stand tall, speak freely and with courage, and say, "Oh, thank you."